tearing themselves apart. The Conservatives at war as they face two huge imminent threats. Once they were allies, but now they are locked in an intensely personal public fight over Boris Johnson's honours list.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
Johnson responded by saying his successor was talking total rubbish. All this as the Tories face 3 by-elections with the opposition licking their lips. But the first looming threat to the Conservative Party's reputation is the imminent publication of the report, which is expected to rule that the former Prime Minister knowingly lied to Parliament over number 10 lockdown parties. Robert will be here to analyse it all. Also tonight, Donald Trump arrives in Florida to face the gravest charges yet of putting at risk America's most sensitive secrets. Tributes to the Italian leader Silvio Berlusconi, who came back from even more political scandals than Trump and Johnson after his death, aged 86. 3.5 years after the greatest public health crisis in a century, the COVID inquiry prepares for its first public hearings. And it may have rained on their parade, but Man City didn't let it spoil the party as they brought home their trophy treble.
We have to be the best parade with this rain, otherwise it's not Manchester.
This is Manchester, this is how it rolls!
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omaar.
Good evening. Just how much damage is being done to the government and the Conservative Party by the row between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson is perhaps impossible to assess tonight, because right now the rest of the nation is still in the middle of this intense war going on at the heart of the Tory party. Today, the issue of who did and did not appear on Mr Johnson's resignation honours list got very rancorous indeed. Mr Sunak accused his predecessor of asking him to overrule the honours vetting committee. Mr Johnson responded saying the Prime Minister was talking rubbish. But all of this comes on the eve of a major event for the government that gets to the very heart of what brought all this about. Within the next 48 hours, we'll see the expected publication of the report into parties within number 10 during lockdown when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. And it's expected to conclude he knowingly misled Parliament about the affair.
The Prime Minister came out fighting this morning, not against the Labour Party, but against his former boss, Boris Johnson, who'd wanted to put 3 of his MP allies into the House of Lords and accused Rishi Sunak of somehow blocking them via the House of Lords Appointments Commission, or HOLAC.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises with people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
It was a blue-on-blue spat between a Prime Minister and the ex-Prime Minister. And Johnson replied, Rishi Sunak is talking rubbish. To honour these peerages, it was not necessary to overrule HOLAC, but simply to ask them to renew their vetting, which was a mere formality. One of the former ministers not now getting a peerage was incandescent, and she blamed Rishi Sunak and his aide and friend from school, James Forsyth.
You come up against someone like Rishi Sunak and James Forsyth from privileged backgrounds who have it all very easily given to them on a plate, you're in trouble. You won't make it because they can do whatever they want to stop it.
But this row over peerages distracts from a much bigger problem for the Tory party, which is that a committee of MPs was meeting today to find Boris Johnson guilty of lying to the Commons about what he knew about those illegal Downing Street parties.
For me, integrity and honesty in high public office is incredibly important, and it's incredibly important that the House of Commons can trust the word of the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister isn't in any way seen to be actively or knowingly misleading the House, and it appears that the committee has decided that he has done, and if that is the case, he said he'd go, and that was the right thing to do.
All this madness stems from Johnson's decision to quit Parliament on Friday night, furious that MPs were about to find him guilty of recklessly lying to them. 2 of his most loyal allies also quit, so there will be 3 by-elections, which Sunak needs, like a hole in the head. Probably on the 13th or 20th of July. Today, the Court for MPs, the Privileges Committee, finalised their guilty verdict, and their judgment on Johnson will soon be published, either tomorrow or on Wednesday.
Well, Boris Johnson has demeaned British politics. Boris Johnson and the modern Conservative Party, I think, have let people down, and they've actually failed our country.
One of Johnson's former lieutenants says it's a stitch-up.
The establishment has seen Boris out the door.
End of the road for Johnson. We asked the minister who blew up his first tilt at becoming PM.
I'm not really very gifted as a clairvoyant. I wouldn't want to make predictions. But, you know, I hope that he has an opportunity to spend time with his family and to, you know, away from the Westminster glare.
Here they are again, the pictures of Downing Street parties that have ended his career at the top of British politics. Forever? Perhaps.
Robert, there are several parts to this crisis within the Conservative Party. There's the rows between Sunak and Johnson. There's the coming by-elections. But at the heart of it, I guess, is this expected report by Parliament into whether Boris Johnson lied over Partygate.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've got this furious row between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson about whether Sunak went out of his way to block the appointment as Lords of Nadine Dorries and a couple of other Tory MPs. Sunak said he follows process. Boris Johnson sort of basically accusing Sunak of being mean to him. But this is a sideshow. This is a safe argument between the two of them, even if you're a Tory MP, you don't want to see a Prime Minister and ex-Prime Minister at each other. No, the big issue, the big problem for the Tory party is probably on Wednesday, might be tomorrow, we will get this astonishingly damaging report by a committee of Boris Johnson's peers, the Privileges Committee, the sort of court for the House of Commons, where there are a majority of Tory MPs. So when you hear somebody like Jake Berry, the former close aide to Boris Johnson, calling what's happened to Boris Johnson a stitch-up, you've got to think, well, I mean, how is it a stitch-up? I mean, demonstrate to us, because, I mean, it is your Tory colleagues who have found him guilty of this most serious of offences when it comes to the House of Commons, which is deliberately, recklessly lying to MPs about those infamous parties that took place in Downing Street. And you'll remember Boris Johnson repeatedly said they didn't happen, and the Privileges Committee will say not only did they happen, but he knew that they happened. The following week, after we get this report, we will see a motion put to the House of Commons, and then there's a very difficult decision for the Prime Minister whether or not to simply let the motion go through unopposed, which would simply be the whole Tory party saying that Boris Johnson is guilty, needs to be censured, needs to be punished. And then after all that, as you say, we've got these three by-elections, which if you look at the current state of the opinion polls, look at the optimism and confidence of the Lib Dems and Labour, you wouldn't bet on Rishi Sunak winning any of what looked in the past to be very safe Tory seats. So this is terrible, terrible for Rishi Sunak running all the way to the summer.
It looks like a perfect storm for him. Robert, thank you very much indeed. Now, from the turmoil gripping the former leader in Westminster to a similar crisis facing the occupant of the top job in Scotland. After her arrest yesterday, Nicola Sturgeon has learned she does not face immediate suspension. Her successor as First Minister, Humza Yousaf, said he saw no reason to take such action. Ms Sturgeon was released without charge after being questioned for nearly 7 hours in relation to an ongoing inquiry into SNP finances. She says she is innocent of any wrongdoing.
Facing the music, Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf arrived in Inverness today following the latest SNP arrest. His former political mentor, Nicola Sturgeon, was released from police custody 24 hours ago, and he's coming under increased pressure to suspend her.
No, I won't be suspending Nicola Sturgeon. I'll be treating her exactly in the same way as I treated, for example, Colin Beattie, both released without charge, and therefore there's no reason for me to suspend them.
The police investigation relates to more than £600,000 that was fundraised for an independence campaign. But by 2019, SNP accounts showed the party had just under £97,000. In 2021, Peter Murrell, the former chief executive of the party, loaned more than £100,000 of his own money. A month later, police launched their inquiry. The arrest began in April of this year. First with Peter Murrell, then the SNP treasurer Colin Beattie, and 2 months later Nicola Sturgeon, all released without charge. But with a by-election looming in Blantyre, the news is having an impact on voters.
I wouldn't vote for SNP anyway. There's absolutely no chance. I think what's going on is disgusting.
Politicians, the people you trust, haven't they? Regardless of which side they're on, they should be trustworthy.
Do you usually vote SNP?
I do actually, yeah, SNP, but I didn't realise that about Nicola Sturgeon getting arrested. That would definitely have an impact on votes.
And those are the people Scottish Labour are looking to gain as they capitalise on the recent SNP turmoil.
This is now a political party that is mired in scandal, mired in division and trying to go day by day. And the consequence of that is a distracted, incompetent and dysfunctional SNP government. And frankly, the people of Scotland deserve better than that.
Polling experts believe this is the first real threat to the SNP's dominance in Scotland for over a decade.
Most of Labour's vote is still a unionist vote, but insofar as it can at least pick up a modicum of support amongst Yes supporters, that does make Labour more of a threat to the SNP than either the Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats.
There's been no sign of Nicola Sturgeon, but in a Twitter statement yesterday, she maintained her innocence. She's due to return to Holyrood in the coming days, where she can expect some tough questions. Louise Scott, News at 10.
Across the Atlantic now, and to another larger-than-life political figure whose comeback ambitions look set to face their sternest test this week. Donald Trump has arrived in Florida ahead of his appearance in the dock at a federal court in Miami tomorrow. He faces charges which could carry a prison sentence over classified documents found at his home. Dan is in Miami. Dan, what impact will this case have on Trump, but also more critically, the upcoming election?
Well, Donald Trump arrived here a little over an hour ago in Miami, coming off his private jet and making his way to the golf course behind me as his poll numbers and campaign contributions continue to rise. He's actually having meetings right now in the complex behind me with lawyers because his legal team abruptly quit last week, and he's casting around for someone to represent him for this hearing tomorrow at 8 p.m. UK time. Of course, there are concerns about trouble tomorrow. There is talk of a lot of pro-Trump supporters turning up at the court. The mayor today of Miami said that they've got the resources in place to cope with a crowd anywhere in size from 5 to 50,000. I think if anywhere near that 50,000 number turns up, it could be extremely volatile. Tempers, after all, could fray very easily. But I think it's important not to lose sight of the significance of this day, and that Donald Trump is being accused of some very, very serious crimes after those documents were found in his estate in Florida, Mar-a-Lago. 37 counts in all, some of which carry a 20-year prison sentence. He is vowing over the weekend to continue fighting to get back into the White House as he continues to fight these charges.
OK, Dan in Miami, thank you very much indeed. Big day tomorrow. Now, the death was announced today of a leader whose life became an object lesson in the art of political survival against huge odds. Silvio Berlusconi was Italy's longest-serving prime minister, but he was also constantly dogged by scandal and controversy. Yet the billionaire media mogul, with a taste for the high life, to put it mildly, also made his mark as a leader and statesman. His death at the age of 86 signals the end of a career that set the benchmark for the age of populist politicians.
The godfather of 21st century populism, the first leader of a major economy to defy all the rules of political behaviour, to connect directly with voters, who in turn forgave the most egregious, even downright illegal behaviour. At first it was thought this could only happen in Italy. We were soon to learn that other countries too could fall under the spell of their own versions of the charismatic, outrageous, unconventional Berlusconi. A cruise ship crooner who built a property empire, expanded it into a media empire that came to dominate Italy's airwaves, and who then sought political power, as much as anything to protect his own commercial interests. Forming a right-wing political party, naming it after a football chant, Forza Italia, he stepped onto the carousel of post-war Italian prime ministers, but unlike the others was not immediately pushed off. The longest serving, the first to serve out a full 5-year term, he had the power and the mandate to reform and transform his country. In the event, he preferred his notorious bunga bunga parties, became ensnared in endless accusations of bribery, tax evasion, underage sex. Having doubled Italy's public debt, he was eventually driven from office during the Euro crisis of 2011 and then banned from returning for 6 years. On the world stage, he'd been a friend of Tony and Cherie Blair, famously inviting them to holiday with him as he recuperated in Sardinia from a hair transplant. He controversially backed President George Bush's invasion of Iraq, committing Italian forces, to the anger of many of his countrymen. And to the end, he remained a firm supporter of Vladimir Putin, even after the invasion of Ukraine. Putin today described him as a dear person, a true friend. Pretty much the nicest thing any leader has said following his death.
Silvio Berlusconi era soprattutto un combattente.
Italy's current Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, a right-wing protege of Berlusconi, called him a fighter, never afraid to defend his beliefs. Her coalition may struggle to survive without him and his party, but her country is at least now free of the cult of personality that dominated and in many eyes degraded its politics for almost 3 decades. James Mates, News at 10.
Women's rights groups say there is a desperate need for reform after a mother of 3 was jailed for ending her pregnancy with illegally obtained abortion pills. Stoke Crown Court heard how the woman, who's 44, lied about how far along her pregnancy was to get the drug from the British Pregnancy Advisory Service. Sentencing her to 28 months, the judge described it as a tragic case. It seems that a dispute between neighbours in a small French country village could have ended with an 11-year-old British girl being shot dead. Celine Thornton was playing on a garden swing during a barbecue at her family's home in Brittany when she was hit by a gunshot. Her father, Adrian, was also badly hurt. Police have arrested their neighbour, a 71-year-old Dutchman.
It should be the most carefree of places, an ordinary back garden in a quiet corner of Western France. But where 2 British sisters, aged 8 and 11, once played in the sun, police and forensic specialists are now searching for evidence after Celine Thornton, the eldest, was shot on her garden swing. The authorities had been aware of a dispute between the Thorntons and their elderly Dutch neighbour.
Some residents have told us there were violent quarrels, that once he took his gun out. If we and the police had known that, we'd have seized his weapon. Maybe this wouldn't have happened.
Instead, animosity exploded into inexplicable violence.
Le père de famille avait entrepris des travaux de jardinage.
The father of the family had been gardening, working on the hedge between the 2 properties. It appears that exasperated the suspect, who picked up his rifle and fired 3 or 4 bullets.
Alongside Celine, both her parents were also hit and injured here, her father critically, leaving Celine's little sister Celeste to run for help. The 71-year-old has now been charged with murder, but neighbours still can't believe it.
The little one was higher up. The parents were sitting on a bench. I would have never thought he had a gun.
It's less than a week since this park in Annecy witnessed the stabbing of 4 preschool children, a Syrian refugee charged with attempted murder after they were left critically injured. Once again, a youngster at play has been attacked in France for no discernible reason. Once again, a nation is asking itself why anyone would want to turn their anger and their weapon on a defenceless child. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
Now, the number of people crossing the channel in small boats yesterday was the highest daily total so far this year. According to Home Office figures released today, 616 people were detected crossing the channel, passing the year's previous daily high of 497 on the 22nd of April. The total number of crossings so far this year is estimated at just over 8,300, slightly down on the equivalent figure at the same point last year. A long-awaited public inquiry into the COVID pandemic is finally set to get underway tomorrow. It will examine Britain's response to the infection after its arrival in the early months of 2020. Evidence will be heard from hundreds of those affected, including leading medical and political figures. Romilly's here to explain what we can expect.
Well, Rageh, it's a period of our recent history that's had an enormous impact on all of our lives, on our finances, the health service, children's education, and for many, the pain of personal bereavement too. Now the COVID inquiry is going to attempt to make sense of it all and fundamentally to ask what lessons should be learnt. Its remit is very broad. To make it more manageable, it will be broken down into modules. The first will look at the UK's pandemic preparedness, hearing 6 weeks of evidence from 70 witnesses in that module alone. In October, the second and potentially more contentious module, looking at political decision-making, will open. By summer 2024, the inquiry expects to be looking at vaccines and therapeutics. Modules on the impact of the pandemic on healthcare, government procurement like the supply of PPE and the controversial handling of the care sector will follow, with all the hearings not due to finish until summer 2026. For comparison, Sweden has already opened and concluded its inquiry. However, the chair, Lady Hallett, has promised to speed the process up with interim findings published after each module. So we know it will be long. Let's have a look at the scale of the task ahead of it. There are 135 groups or core participants represented at the inquiry, including COVID-bereaved families, the NHS and government departments. 55,000 government documents have already been handed over. The former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, alone was sent 150 questions to answer. And there is a cost to all of this, of course, a pretty hefty one. The total figure is expected to exceed 100 million. Bereaved families like Anne Ashworth, who lost her mother to COVID, say it has to be worth it.
Over 220,000 people die. And again, I question people who are asking, why should we have the inquiry now? I'll say that figure again. Over 220,000 people. Lessons should be learned from the mistakes that are made. There will be another pandemic in the future, and there's no good us trying to bury our heads in the sand and pretending it won't happen, because it will.
The inquiry also has the potential to damage or burnish the reputation of key players in the UK's COVID response. David Cameron and George Osborne are expected to have to defend their record in the next 6 weeks on how austerity affected the UK's preparedness for the pandemic. And while Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock, the former Health Secretary, face the most difficult questions in the autumn, particularly over the handling of care homes and the provision of PPE, Rishi Sunak could have much more to lose. Having come out of the pandemic well, his decisions like the Eat Out to Help Out scheme will be put under scrutiny, while his government's refusal to hand over unredacted material has already led some bereaved families to accuse him of a cover-up. The inquiry certainly has had a long birth and a pretty challenging start, but with scientists warning regularly about the likelihood of another pandemic, its findings on how best to handle the next one should be absolutely crucial, Rageh.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks very much indeed, Romilly. Now, campaigners are angry tonight that reforms to the Ofsted school rating system in England don't go far enough. They follow the death of head teacher Ruth Perry, whose primary school was downgraded to the lowest rating by the education watchdog. Ofsted inspectors will now revisit some downgraded schools within 3 months, but the controversial one-word grading system will stay in place.
Hands up then, please. This school in Halifax has lost faith in Ofsted. Inspectors rated it as requires improvement, language that's hurtful, and a label that the head teacher is desperate to shake off.
We went from outstanding and back-to-back outstandings to RI, which I thought was a little bit unfair at the time. I've seen staff in tears. It's been devastating, actually.
Ofsted has announced changes to the inspection process, which will mean schools graded as inadequate for safeguarding will be revisited within 3 months. From September, reports will refer to the school rather than name individual staff members. And a head teacher will have a better idea of when the next inspection is due, but they'll still only get 24 hours notice. The changes come 5 months after head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life. Her school went from outstanding to inadequate. Her sister says Ofsted need to abolish the one-word judgments to help teachers who were already struggling with the stress of the job.
In Ruth's case, she felt it summing up 32 years of dedication to the teaching profession in one word, let alone a word like inadequate. Can you imagine what that does?
But the Chief Inspector of Ofsted has defended the grading system, saying it's easy to understand.
We do know that parents value the simplicity and clarity, and we know, in fact, that that simplicity and clarity is also picked up and used by other inspectorates in England. It's really valuable for regulatory mechanisms to be as simple and comprehensible as possible. One of the things I know from so much of the feedback we get, that the process itself people generally find constructive, supportive, and the feedback we collect says that in the vast majority of cases people find it a useful process that will help them improve.
But at Parkinson Lane School, parents we spoke to said Ofsted's assessment of their school isn't a true reflection of their experience.
But if the teachers are stressed and that pressure comes down to the children.
I've always thought of this school outstanding no matter what the Ofsted said.
But the question is whether these reforms go far enough or whether the way we assess our schools is itself now inadequate. Stacey Foster, News at 10, Halifax.
A sliver of hope for people planning to travel abroad from Heathrow this summer. Strikes by security guards planned for the weekend of the 24th and 25th of June have been postponed. The Unite Union says this is to discuss what it calls an improved pay offer. There are still 29 days of walkouts by security guards, though, scheduled across the summer. Finally, after the sheer delirium of Manchester City's Champions League win on Saturday, the blue half of the city went into full-on party mode this evening. Along with the Premier League title and the FA Cup, it was the final crown that meant City had won the treble, a feat only previously achieved by their neighbours across town, Manchester United in the red half. Nearly a quarter of a century ago, tens of thousands of their fans turned out for the victory parade to see their Manchester City heroes parade the coveted trophies.
Led by Jack Grealish, who else? The three-day-long, non-stop party rolled into the city centre this evening. Erling Haaland doesn't often let his hair down, but today he made an exception. Trebles don't come around very often. As the bus weaved its way through the streets, thousands along the route cheered their heroes on. City fans have waited a very long time for this moment, so even when the heavens opened, and with some vengeance, those dressed in light blue were going nowhere.
It can hailstone, it can snow for all I care. I'm staying right here, I ain't going nowhere.
It's the norm. This is the weather all the time. Just embrace it.
The players weren't taking cover either. What they've achieved is very rare, and history suggests it may never happen again. Like the fans, they were drenched but delirious. At the stage where they were heading, the quickest got the prime spots.
They've beaten Arsenal in the league title race, they beat Man United in the FA Cup final, and they've beaten Bayern Munich, Real Madrid and Inter Milan to win the Champions League. I think this season is one that will be spoken about for years to come by so many.
The man who masterminded this historic year was first to appear, a genius who clearly understands now what it means to be Mancunian.
We have to be the best parade with this rain, otherwise it's not Manchester.
This is Manchester, this is how it rolls.
Has to be like that. No sunshine, no, we don't want sunshine. We want rain. So, the perfect one.
City fans have enjoyed many parades over the years, but none as much as this one. Kings of Europe is the title they always coveted. Rival clubs say City's successes should be marked by asterisks. The club faces 100+ Premier League charges over financial irregularities. They are charges City refute, and there won't be an outcome for years.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all the support during the whole season. It's been incredible, and we got 3 trophies!
Given Pep Guardiola isn't going anywhere, City's rivals must come up with new ways to derail these history makers. If they don't, who's to say we won't all be back here again in a year's time? Steve Scott, News at 10, Manchester.
And that's all for tonight from the team and me. Good night. Thanks for watching.